Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras.
And I'm Natasha Kircha. Coming up in today's newscast, Israelis prepare for the Jewish Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur.
We have the scoop on how much the average Israeli salary has changed over the last year.
And we'll take a look at why Egypt is becoming one of the most popular travel destinations for Israelis. Well, Yom Kippur, the annual Jewish Day of Atonement, begins tomorrow evening. And as the holiest day on the Hebrew calendar, observant Jews worldwide will fast for 25 hours. No food and no drink.
Yeah, but according to a poll by the Israeli Democracy Institute, while only 23% of Israeli Jews plan to go to synagogue, a whopping 60.5% plan to fast.
That leaves 27.5% of Jewish Israelis who are not observing the tradition, 5% who plan to at least drink water, and 7% who have yet to decide. Aside from fasting, however, Yom Kippur is marked by prayers for forgiveness and for a good new year.
And it's also marked by the blowing of the shofar, a ram's horn that indicates the conclusion of the holiday. As for less observant Jews, the day is largely just a day to relax.
Yeah, well, the streets across the country will be largely deserted, filled only by pedestrians, bike riders, and the like, even on the highways.
Yeah, and likewise, all the stores, public transportation, government services, and even TV broadcasters will cease operation for the day.
All right, moving on. In a shocking reversal of Middle East policy, the United States is announcing that it will be abstaining from action against Turkey in Syria. The White House says President Trump now endorses President Erdogan's military aspirations against the Kurds along the border.
The Turkish leader views the United States-backed Kurdish militia as a terror group, as they're also a member to the Syrian Democratic Forces, but they've also been a key instrument in the war against the Islamic State, or ISIS. So why pull back the roughly 150 U.S. personnel deployed in the area? Why the seeming betrayal? And how does it affect the region as a whole?
Well, first, while the U.S. military wouldn't completely pull out just yet, the removal of these forces falls in line with Trump's announced goals of pulling out of Syria as soon as possible. And on the subject of betrayal, well, the White House statement says that as Turkey will soon be moving forward with its long-planned operation, the U.S. will neither support nor get involved, adding that having defeated the ISIS caliphate, U.S. forces will no longer be in the area.
So what happens next? Well, Erdogan reportedly wants to establish a so-called safe zone 20 miles wide and 300 miles long along the border. And it's there that he says he'll settle over 1 million Syrian refugees, as opposed to releasing them into Europe as he's previously threatened. But the Pentagon, United States diplomatic and intelligence officials, and important allies around the globe all argued against the U.S.-Syria withdrawal back in December 2018 after Trump first announced it.
That's because it's thought that allies like the Kurds will lose trust and look to new partnerships. Also, it's feared that the vacuum left by the U.S. Army would cause a reversal of the victories that have so far been achieved.
And former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis even resigned actually after Trump's surprise announcement at the time. And Trump eventually backed down for a time, but still it appears as though he's now following through. In any case, Israel in particular has another fear, because with the United States forces leaving, it's thought that Iran will also push further into Syria.
And following the recent attacks on Saudi oil facilities, which are also thought to be orchestrated by Tehran, Netanyahu is reportedly pushing for a missile defense project to counter Iranian cruise missiles.
All right, it's been months since Israel started withholding tax revenues from the PA equal to the salaries that Ramallah pays to terrorists and their families, roughly $138 million since February 2019.
And in protest of the action, the PA has since refused any and all tax revenues that Israel collects. But this has put the Palestinian government in dire straits, forcing it to cut staff, services, and government salaries by upwards of 50 to 60%.
So as of Sunday, President Abbas is now agreeing to accept the sanctioned revenues. And here to discuss this further, we are joined by Mark Schulman, columnist for Newsweek and editor of HistoryCentral.com. So would you consider Israel's withdrawal or withholding of these tax monies to be a success of sorts?
Sort of. I mean, a propaganda success. It plays very well in Israeli domestic politics, without a doubt. Remember, there's two things taking place simultaneously. It wasn't only us. It was the Taylor Force Act by the United States that cut off all American aid as a result. So not only did we stop giving them money, but the United States stopped giving money over the same issue. Yeah. So both issues were
which was the payment of
money to families of and terrorists who had taken action against Israel or Americans or anyone else.
So the question is, should Israel maybe increase the sanctions, since the Palestinian Authority still intends to continue its so-called pay-for-slay policy?
We got to understand, it's complicated. The old saying, someone else's terrorist is, one person's terrorist is someone else's freedom fighter. To me, as an Israeli, they're terrorists and they're my enemies and everything else like that. But we also have to understand from the Palestinian standpoint, they fight for Palestinian freedom. No one else is doing it. We've been occupying these people for 50 years. Now, I'm not justifying it, mind you, but we need to understand that from the Palestinian standpoint, their government can't say, well, we're going to leave all these families without homes, without anything, because as far as the Palestinian public is concerned, these people are heroes. Now, they're not our heroes, they're our enemies.
Which just, begs the question, why then should Israel be paying
because
money?
Because it's in our interest the Palestinian Authority exists. Let's be honest. If the Palestinian Authority stops existing, we have to go in there. We have to start providing education, health, everything else that we were doing before Oslo. Now, one can argue the benefits and the pluses and minuses of Oslo, but we had a military administration and we took care of everything. It was at our expense. At the moment, it's the Palestinian Authority. The world gives them money. Not only the United States, but other countries give them money. They wouldn't be giving us money to take care of the Palestinians. And they perform, they've been working closely with our security personnel to stop other terror attacks. So it's
But isn't it in Israel's best interest to tell the Palestinian Authority, forget withholding whatever you pay terrorists. We're withholding tax, period, until you stop paying terrorists.
Because they're not willing to in the end. I mean, what they're saying is, okay,
they weren't willing to take the rest of the revenues until now.
But that's cutting off our nose to spite our face. In other words, we can't force them to do it up to a certain extent. We can take away the money that they're doing.
Well, they've come back to the
money.
Negotiating table clearly right now. So the question is that because of the severe economic crisis?
They absolutely needed the money. They originally took the state, well, if you're not going to give us that money, we don't want any of your money. But they can't afford that. They realized that. No one came forth and gave them money instead. The Qataris didn't come forth. No one replaced the money. Don't forget, this is their money. It's not like we're giving them money. This is the money that we collect at the ports in taxes, and we just pass it on to them. That's the agreement. We're supposed to pass on their money. So again, we're not giving them the money. We're just giving the money that we've been collecting for them, less the amount they're paying terrorists. So what more can we do really in that sense? We can't change the very basis of Palestinian society in that sort of way. I mean, we can argue about the textbooks, and we need to do things about that. But we have to understand that to these people, as much as we hate the terrorists, and as much as, from any sort of perspective, people who kill civilians are terrible people, to them, they're still heroes because they're freedom fighters. And we need to understand that as much as we hate them, and I hate them, don't get me wrong, but we have to understand there's two sides to it, and we have to understand how to balance the two, and we have to understand the most important point. The Palestinian Authority serves our interests. And if it didn't serve our interests, we wouldn't keep it in power. But it serves our interests.
Well, speaking of economic straits, we're going to have to unfortunately move on to our next story. But thank you so much for joining us. Now, the cost of living in Israel is also one of the highest in the world. And just months ago, Tel Aviv was ranked the world's 10th most expensive city. But there is some good news for locals. The average Israeli salary has risen by 3.4% to just over 11,000 shekels per month, or $3,100. Electricity, water, groceries, rent. When it comes to paying the bills, for many Israelis, it's a struggle. An estimated 21% of the Israeli population lives below the poverty line, and prices are much higher than they should be given the average Israeli income. The good news is that Israel's employment rate is at an all-time high of 60.9%. That's 3,812,000 salaried Israelis, and the average salary has risen by almost 3.5% in the last year. Today, the average Israeli is making $3,163 per month, according to the Central Bureau of Statistics. But keep in mind that 66% of salaried workers surveyed make below that national average. So who's bringing the average up? Well, the highest paid industry in Israel today is the information and communications sector, which includes tons of tech companies, where the average pay is around $6,300 a month. The financial and insurance industry comes in at second with a mean salary of almost $5,800 monthly. So what about the lower paid sectors? Well, Israelis working in the hospitality and food industry make an average of $1,480 a month, and those in the education field make around $2,600 a month. So what's the average cost of living in Israel? Well, the average Israeli family pays around $1,100 a month for housing, $935 for transportation, and $662 for food. So if you do the math, while the average Israeli salary has risen, many Israelis are still living paycheck to paycheck.
All right, now people are shocked, and rightly so, by a story coming out of Melbourne, Australia this past week, where a 12-year-old Jewish boy was actually forced to kneel and kiss the shoes of his Muslim classmate. Here with the story is ILTV's Nittany Manson.
Yeah, so a few upsetting stories are coming out of Melbourne right now. As you said, a child was forced to kiss the feet of a classmate, and it seems like this incident, which was caught on tape and shared on social media, actually follows a long history of bullying and threats by other children.
And this has gone viral, right? I mean, I've seen it all over the internet.
Yeah, people are really upset by this, and well, the parents of the child were outraged not only by the incident, but also by the response or lack thereof from the school and the education department, both of whom have since denied responsibility, stating that it didn't happen on school grounds.
Right. You know, I guess they're saying that it's not physically at school, so they can't control it.
Yeah, but I mean, to a certain extent, because it seems as though this bullying was not just a one-off incident. Mm-hmm. I mean, speaking with the Sydney Morning Herald, the boy's mother said that she was offended because the school did nothing to protect her son leading up to this. And even later, another boy at the same school was actually suspended for attacking the Jewish child in a locker room, and this left him with a bruised back and skin gouged out of his shoulder.
Oh, no.
So although that in this case the child was suspended, there needs to be some kind of preventative action.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. You can't just wait for something like this to happen to respond if you can try and prevent it altogether from the beginning. Now, have the families of the bullies reached out to apologize here?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because actually the child's mother did reach out to the parents of the Muslim boy, who are equally shocked by the incident, and they've since met with the boys to try and explain about building bridges and not creating divisions between the two people.
Oh, well, that seems like a step in the right direction, at least.
Yeah, it is, but it seems that more parents really need to sit down with their children and explain these things, because this case comes at the same time as another one came out in Melbourne, where a 5-year-old boy got to the point that he was wetting himself in class rather than going to the restroom because of taunts from his classmates about being circumcised.
It's just terrible, and he's so young for this to even be a topic.
5 years old. According to the boy's mother, the children were using terms like dirty Jew and Jewish cockroach, and she was so dissatisfied with the response from the school that the boy is actually now being homeschooled while they figure out what to do. And unfortunately, it seems like this is a growing issue. Dvir Abramovich, the chairman of the Anti-Defamation Commission, actually says this is a disturbing trend of Jewish parents removing their children from government schools in Melbourne for fear of them being harmed.
All right, well, I hope that, as horrible as these stories are to hear, that they will be a wake-up call of sorts, and that people will use them as a learning experience moving forward. Nittany, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, let's now turn to ILTV's Shanna Fold, who joins us from Jerusalem, where an incredible and uplifting annual event has just taken place.
Every year, on the first Sunday of October, around 500,000 evangelical Christian groups around the world pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And this year, hundreds have boarded a plane to the Holy Land to pray and sing together in a special annual event.
And the time the airplane came, it's arrived here, I just felt I'm home.
It's called the Global Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem. And this week, the Ha'as Promenade was filled with 33 pastors from Brazil, U.S. Ambassador David Friedman, church groups from Alabama, and the event founder, Bishop Robert Stearns.
Every single year we see two things. We see the growth of more and more nations, more and more churches participating, younger and younger people coming to the land. But then we see something else. We see more and more Jews and Christians becoming friends.
Isaiah said thousands of years ago that the house of God will be the house of prayer for all nations, and all the nations will come here and pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Evangelical Christians are considered the largest group of Israel supporters outside of the Jewish people themselves. It makes sense. Many believe that all of the Jews must gather in Israel in order to ensure the second coming of Jesus Christ.
I see myself as a Christian differently than I did before coming to this land.
I'm felt alive. I can breathe, and now I know he's alive, makes sense what I believe.
One of the focuses for pastors at this year's event is getting young millennials to strengthen their support for Israel and believe in the state's right to exist.
We're beginning to see a massive disconnect between young millennial Christians and Israel. And what we're seeing is a rise of anti-Semitism, replacement theology. And if we don't reach this younger generation, there will not be supporters of Israel in the future. The best way to do that is to bring young millennial Christians to the land of Israel.
It's absolutely crucial because younger people, they don't read the Bible like they used to. They're living on YouTube. So the Bible stories that my generation was raised on are not so familiar. So when you bring them here and they see it firsthand, it moves their heart.
There's a new breed of Christian on the earth. I think for a long time, for 2,000 years, Christians have not been good friends, good younger brothers to Israel. And we are fighting to see the tide turn, to see a new breed of Christian raise up, but are going to say to Israel, your God is my God and your people is my people.
For the past 2.5 years, Israeli Antiquities Authority researchers have been working tirelessly to excavate a massive archaeological site in En Esul, near Wadi Ara of the northern Hasharon region.
And they've now discovered an early Bronze Age metropolis with a shocking size. And here to tell us all about it is Dr. Yitzhak Paz, a senior researcher with the Antiquities Authority and the co-director of the excavations in En Esul. So what did you find? Tell us all about it.
And what we found is a huge site, a huge settlement that we date to the late 4th millennium BC.
No big deal. Long time ago.
Yeah, of course. It's about 5,000 years ago. But what's important here is that this is one of the most important settlements, and this is so far the largest in our region. Wow. And we believe it has urban character.
What can we learn from these discoveries? You say that it's one of the most important discoveries.
Yeah, because unlike other sites from this period, which were excavated in a very small scale, our excavation was conducted in immense scale. What I mean, we fully excavated 40 dunams. It's amazing amount.
How many people did that?
Well, we were working with 300 workers, and
how big is that? Like,
what is a dunam for?
Yeah, how do we
American
maybe translate
viewers?
that to like acreage, or how big of a city are we talking about?
65 hectares.
Okay.
65 hectares. How many people do you think lived in this city?
We believe about 5,000 to 6,000 people live there.
Wow.
And this is so far, it is by far the largest site in the southern Levant. It means that it is twice or 3 times larger than any other known sites from this period.
So this is a big city. Now, what is the coolest thing in your eyes that you discovered from this site? I mean, did you find artifacts there as well?
Yeah, of course. We found a lot of, let's say that the architecture is very impressive and was well preserved. And we found several public structures, amongst a huge temple. What we believe to be a temple. We have a whole net of streets and the alleys and
any street signs,
squares, and of course small finds like cylinder seal impressions that depict cultic scenes.
Now this is a huge job. So you said about 300 people were working on this with you. Was it all adults, or
we have a lot of youth working during the excavation. Additionally to.
Well, I was just going to say, like, are they students? Are they?
Yeah, they were students or school children.
No way. How did they get the chance to do that? How did they have the chance to do that?
And what kind of jobs did you give them to do? I see.
Well, let's say that the students could do jobs like adult people,
right?
And school children used smaller tools generally.
Right. Well, you get worried that they might destroy something, right? So you have to be very careful.
Yeah, we have very strict regulations. So.
This is one of the perks of growing up in Israel, that you are literally on a landmine. You have so many different historical discoveries to be made, and if you have access to programs like this and you can actually take part with these archaeologists, it would be my dream. I always wanted to be an archaeologist.
We will have on the 15th and the 16th to October an open days in the site for the public, so everyone can come.
That's where we're gonna go. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paz.
Thank you.
All right, now if you've ever driven in Israel, you know the drill. Basically, just prepare yourself for crippling traffic that will make your daily commute much longer than necessary. Well, now Israel is unveiling a new plan to help ease the congestion on the roads, carpool lanes, for the first time in Israeli history. Starting this week, cars with more than one passenger will now be allowed to use a new special lane on Israel's famed Ayalon Highway, which stretches from Tel Aviv to the north. The High Occupancy Vehicle Lane, or HOV lane, will be extended at a later date on other roads in Israel. Today, private cars in Israel carry an average of 1.2 people, driver included. That's significantly below the average in other OECD countries, which is typically between 1.6 to 1.8 occupants per vehicle. And Israelis can feel the difference. Travel time and cost of gas goes up with the congestion on the roads, and Israel's Ministry of Transportation says that having a dedicated carpool lane will significantly reduce these costs. So what about the Israelis who don't necessarily have a buddy to drive around? Well, Transportation Minister Bezalel Smotrich says that those who would like to continue using private vehicles on their own will have to pay a price because their travel times will increase since fewer lanes will be available to them.
In the last few years, thousands of Israelis have ignored concerned alerts by authorities and have crossed into Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, which has long been a popular tourist destination. And now, one of those people is ILTV's very own Emmanuel Kadosh, who actually just returned last night from the area. So, Emmanuel, let's see what you have to say.
Hey, Aaron and Natasha. Well, yes, there have been many warning and pushbacks from the Israeli authorities to keep out of the Sinai Peninsula due to serious threats of terror attacks, but I definitely had a different experience. Sinai has become an extremely popular tourist destination, especially over the last few years, especially this specific year due to its gorgeous and quiet beaches, laid-back atmosphere, and extremely cheap prices.
You know, I've been there myself, but what interests me is that a lot of people here in Israel are still very concerned about going. So what was it feeling like there for you? Because I know you were initially concerned.
Right. Well, at first, like you said, I was very nervous to cross the border into Egypt. It was my first time there, and I really didn't, know what to expect. A day before we drove down, actually, we were getting emails and phone calls from family members telling us not to go, but I really am so happy that I went. I stayed at a beautiful resort, and the people working there ended up being such good friends and such good people to, talk to all night about the misconceptions actually of Sinai and how important the safety of tourists really is to the people that actually live there.
Well, and I know, a lot of people are visiting Sinai lately, so there has to be something magical about the place.
Right. Well, there is. I read that just during this holiday season alone, there are over 150,000 Israelis expected to visit Sinai, and on Rosh Hashanah, over 35,000 Israelis were there, which is actually a 30% increase from last year. It really became the spot to go to this summer.
Yeah, even in Yom Kippur, people are heading over there.
Right.
But did you meet people from around the world, or were there mainly Israeli tourists there?
Well, I mostly saw Israelis there, and tons of families actually with their little kids that were relaxing at the beach, eating delicious food, and just, enjoying the silence. There was barely any internet, which was interesting.
Yes.
And everyone's walking around barefoot and super, super basic. It was pure magic.
Well, I know that you went with your mom, so that also probably helped. But,
yes.
Anyhow, what was, what's the trip to get there, like the kind of process of going from Israel to Egypt?
Right. So we drove down in a car from Tel Aviv to Eilat, which took about 4 hours. We parked our car right outside the border of Egypt. And then we crossed the border, which was a lot less stressful than expected. And then we had an organized driver to take us from the border to our hotel, which took about 30 minutes. So it's definitely like a day of traveling, but totally worth it.
Yeah, and you can take the bus to go down there as well if you don't have a car. And you can just get the visa right there when you're crossing the border.
Options. All right, well, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at the weather forecast on that note. Tonight should be partly cloudy and warm with a nice low of 69 or 21 degrees Celsius. And then tomorrow you can expect a slight rise in temperatures and sunny skies with a high of 85 or 29 degrees Celsius.
And that, of course, is it for our news today. Today's exchange rate is 3.49 shekels to the American dollar. For For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. I'm Aaron Porras.
And I'm Natasha Kirchuk. Thanks so much for watching, and Gmar Chatima Tova.
Gmar Chatima Tova.